Well, that was kind of awkward. Wow. Just absolutely locked myself up my room, which is never ideal. Okay, well, there you go. That's why you always carry lockpicks with you. Oh, crikey. Anyway, welcome to the Many Hats Club. And it's an absolute pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Just before we kick off the talk, I'll just do a quick intro to people that maybe have not joined us before. So for anyone that hasn't joined us either on this recorded talk or on the actual live tonight, this evening, if you want to ask any questions, we've actually got a couple of new channels set up. So if you want to have a general chat about what's going on within the talk, you could use the talk chat. But if you've got any specific questions, we have a new channel called Talk Questions. So if you drop them in there, that means that we can pick them up and collect them, and it makes it a lot easier as we go through the talk. So please do ask any questions in Talk Questions or just general chat shenanigans in Talk Chat. So, of course, if you want to catch any of our other podcasts, you can do so on the manyhats.club or on any of your podcast apps. So, yes, I'm delighted to be joined by Georgia. And of course, it'd be great if you could just share with people that maybe not know you or would like to know more about you, who you are and what you do.
Well, I'm Georgia Weidman, and Many Hats is a really good name for a podcast about me, you might say, because though I don't actually wear hats anymore on stage, I do wear lots of hats in real life. I am an entrepreneur, penetration tester, security researcher. I do some speaking and training. I wrote a book. I'm actually now a professor at University of Maryland, University College. I sit on some boards. I do a lot of stuff. So many hats indeed.
Oh wow! That's I didn't know you're a professor as well. That's a lot of hats to wear, isn't it?
It is. It's it can be a lot at times, but I do my best.
and I guess like all people we have on our podcast, it'd be good to get an understanding of how you actually ended up into InfoSec. So could you share a bit about where your journey actually began?
Well, I went to college early. In the United States, for those who are not from here, typically you go to high school from about ages 14 to 18, and then you do 4 years of college or university. Graduate when you're like 21, which is when you can drink here too. So but I actually went to college early after the 8th grade, which I couldn't begin to tell you what form that adds up to, in Britain or wherever. But I went 4 years early, and yeah, so that was interesting. And then when I got out, it was like, okay, I'm 18 years old. I have a college degree. McDonald's won't hire me. So I went to graduate school in computer science. My mother was a computer scientist, professor, actually. As most teenagers, I did not want to be anything like my parents at all. So I did not want to do computer science. But, I also didn't want to be 18 and then going back to live with my parents. So, I did the grad school thing. And they had this thing called the Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition. That there was a cyber defense club that I joined, that it was put on by the Cyberwatch Center, which I'm now on the national visiting committee for them. So it all goes full circle. But as part of the competition, which I think the real goal was to make people cry and vomit.
Nice.
But you were the white team. The scenario was that you were a recently hired IT team. Basically the old IT team had quit. The network was under attack. There were assets you didn't know about. You had to keep business running. There was a CEO who would periodically come and yell at you. I mean, a lot like what, life is like for people on the blue team side in real life. But there was also a red team that was made up of professional hackers by day, and I was completely fascinated by the fact that they kept breaking into my machines and sending me messages. So by the end of the competition, I knew that I wanted to be just like them. And so that's, the career path that I pursued, for better or for worse.
Yeah, and I'm just reading some stuff on. I did sort of do some research and stuff, but I just read your LinkedIn profile, and I'd like to read it out because some of the highlights, because of course you've got an MS in computer science and CSSP and OSCP, and then you've got your work in field of smartphone exploitation is being sort of featured in print and television, and then you presented your training at venues such as NSA, West Point, Black Hat. You run your own business now, of course, as well. You've been awarded the DARPA Fast Track grant. I mean, I'm just reading. As you read through this, I mean, your list of achievements is pretty impressive, really.
Well, thank you. I mean, it just feels like real life to me, and I always feel rather dull, but I appreciate the sentiment nonetheless.
and so you started to, just going back to your sort of kind of career path, so I can kind of understand how it kind of all fleshes out. So you sort of started moving into offensive security. How did that kind of restart sort of kind of coming to fruition? So you said you wanted to start being sort of more offensive and work sort of doing the hacking side. How did that how did that come about? What opportunities kind of presented themselves to you?
Well, out of graduate school, I got recruited into one of those, American 3-letter agencies, if you will, but it wasn't classified or anything. I can tell you that I spent most of my time updating people's iTunes for them and finding printers that no one could find. So it was not particularly exciting. I also tried, the private sector, more like business oriented kinds of things. I just found that, I wasn't really, I guess, progressing at the speed that I wanted to. Maybe it was because of my age, who knows, being like 21, 22. But, I found that, going to security conference and giving talks or giving training or, doing podcasts like this, I mean, that really, I found, helped me move forward in my career a lot more than say going to work every day. And I did, branch out on my own fairly quickly. It's, kind of, if it had gone wrong, and I guess it still could, it would be kind of disturbing, the idea that, I'd kind of have to maybe go back to being, a junior pen tester after all this. Because I did go out on my own very quickly, which was, thanks to the DARPA Cyber Fast Track program. I mean, Mudge, from Loft, he's since moved on, but, that was a great program that allowed me and a lot of other, talented hackers who couldn't necessarily, for a lot of the government grants, at least here in the US, you basically need someone whose whole job it is to write grant proposals in order to get these government grants. So for particularly, a young, just starting out hacker, that's not necessarily feasible. DARPA Cyber Fast Track wasn't like that. So, that allowed me to, go out on my own and, kind of make a go of it and try a lot of different stuff and, screw things up along the way, as one does, but, hopefully get more right than I did wrong. And, I continue, now I've got, a second company that's, more of a startup, called Shavira, and, I'm continuing to learn things about like venture capital and things like that, I didn't necessarily learn the first time around with the bulb security, just doing, pen testing and training.
So yeah, that's interesting. So the last it's quite interesting because we've had lots of different speakers on. So we had Dave Kennedy on last week, and we had Casey John Ellis as well, and they talked a bit about business as well, and of course, part of security, if you'll go out on your own, is obviously running your own business, right? Obviously, I want to touch on that a bit later on, because I think I'm quite keen to understand the aspects of what you do. But when you first started your first venture, your kind of first venture, what were the things that you enjoyed most about that?
Well, when I first started bulb security, I really liked, not having to ask someone if I could go to a conference or if I could do a training or if I could do this or I could do that. Particularly, my first job when I worked for the government, it was very much that I had to get approval to do, absolutely everything. If I wanted to walk down the street, holding a sign that said I can't hack, I had to get approval for it. That's kind of a joke, but um being my own boss, being able to, make my own decisions about, what was the kinds of jobs I wanted to take. Though let's be honest, as an early business, you take the jobs that come. But being in charge of those things was really nice, and being able to kind of have the career advancement that I wanted. I always kind of felt like I was overlooked, when I was working for other companies. So being the boss lady, if you will, it was really nice.
And choosing your kind of your own jobs, did that or being in control of that, did that sort of help form your skill sets in terms of the types of tests or assessments that you would do?
It absolutely did. I was very lucky that I did have the grant for the first year. So like my goal was to build a sustainable practice, but it wasn't like, the lights were going to get shut off if I didn't have, X number of customers coming in month one or two.
Mm.
I was also really lucky that, I was able, through the security community to make a lot of contacts where I was able to do some subcontracting work while I was still, building up my brand to get the prime contracts. So I was able to work on some of the skill. I swear, when I had a job, a lot of what I did was just push the go button on Nessus, which, I mean, let's face it, I got to play a lot of Halo, which I never can have time to play video games anymore ever. But, if you want more from life, so yeah, I was able to, through the community and getting help from other people with, getting subcontracts from other companies that had overflow work, build a
Hmm.
skill set that I may not have, I may have read the books or done the CFs, but until you're actually on the ground at the company, doing the pin test, I mean, things are a little different.
Yeah, and I guess so we should definitely talk about I guess what your book and the success of that, and I definitely want to talk about that in a second because I think that's kind of relevant, right? So no, but what was the biggest challenge for you? So just starting out as I guess as you said, learning your craft. What were the biggest challenges that you faced technically, and I guess also sort of personally as well?
Well, the biggest challenges technically have really helped me understand, where other businesses are coming from. I think, coming very much from that, hacker, DEF CON Black Hat, B-sides, what have you, mentality of, that's where I came up, where security was the most important thing and people who were insecure deserved it when they got hacked. you know Being a business owner, having so much on my plate, just the act of having to get a new release of my product out because we've got this big client who wants it like now and it's a huge deal, that testing work that other people did for the OWASP top 10, we may just not have time for that. Or something even simpler like remembering to update the WordPress on all the websites. I mean, these things that we as a community tend to laugh at people about. I mean, it, especially when you're a small business, you're a startup, you don't have necessarily the budget for as many people as you need. That that can be very difficult even for a security person, and that has made me understand my customers so much better, that even to security companies, security is not the most important thing. Keeping the lights on and making payroll, that's what's the most important. So it really changed my outlook on how I interacted with my customers, and how I came to understand their business versus my desire to look how elite I am with breaking into their systems. And what was the second half of the question?
Well, I guess you kind of answered it, because of the fact that you talked about your technical challenges led to your, I guess, building kind of empathy, right, with your customers.
Right.
And so I guess the second part of the question was kind of really around what were your kind of biggest personal challenges when first starting out?
Well, again, going back to the idea that I'm very technical. I'd hardly stand up and say I'm like, the most super elite ever. But I mean, the technical stuff has always been like, I can read the manual, I can figure it out. Give me enough time and drive, I can do it. But I mean, so much of business, so much of you can be, the best malware analyst or the best pen tester or the best this or the best that. And I mean, I've seen this with a lot of people as well who are, can run circles around me, believe me, but, the social skills aren't there, and, they get themselves fired because they do something dumb. And, the social skills for me have always been, also something that I struggle with. So, the social side of sales, the going to the networking events and talking to people about my product, and all these things that, I would really rather just hide in the corner and code, but that's not going to get the product sold. So, that's been, the personal challenge where I've really had to push myself, beyond, my comfort zone.
And do you think that kind of pushing yourself out where so you feel comfortable, or where socially that you you know haven't always been, is that helped you when it comes to doing things like public speaking? Because obviously you do quite a lot of keynote speaking. I know that you were recently AppSec London, I think it was. You were keynoting there. Is that right?
I was, yes, I was there just a short enough time ago that I'm still a little jet lagged from it. And that was a real honor, because OWASP is not my direct, I guess, quote unquote scene. I'm more the black hat DEF CON kind of crowd. So it was a real honor to get to meet a lot of new people there who were very passionate about their work. And I really hope to be more involved with that organization going forward. But to actually answer your question, the public speaking part, on the stage, aside from the Q&A, which, let's face it, I always run over, so there's hardly ever time. It's very scripted. I practice it. I actually get on a stage in my office and practice it. Sometimes I even film myself, show it to, my PR agent or somebody like that. So, I mean, that part isn't particularly hard. Also, I can't see very well far away, and I don't wear my glasses on stage. So if you fall asleep in my talk, it doesn't bother me because I can't see you. But definitely the social skills, pushing my boundaries on the social skills has helped with things like training, because that is, more, I mean, certainly the lecture part is, and even the labs to an extent are scripted, but, when you've got, different student questions every time, certainly, I mean, that has helped, at least with my nerves somewhat, because I do tend to get nervous. But they say that, like, Bob Dylan, like, still throws up, like, every time before he goes on stage, and he's been doing this since, like, forever. So I guess I'm in good company with the nerves.
I was always told if you're not nervous before presenting, then you're not human. So I think that's I think even when I do fair amount of speaking or presenting, and I really enjoy it, and I love being up there. But always get that still get that gut feel, you know.
Yeah.
It's part. I think it's part of it, though, right? I think that it helps with the talk. If you're confident in your content, you still enjoy it, but I think you always get that kind of those butterflies in your stomach before you go up on stage, especially if you're doing like a keynote, right? That's massive.
Right. And then on the flip side, though, I mean, I think, at least for me, I kind of get a real adrenaline rush, when I've done a good job and I know it, like when it's over, like, I think it's probably pretty similar to why people do hard drugs. It's a really good feeling of like, yeah, I just nailed that. So, it's kind of worth it, the butterflies.
Yeah, there's no better feeling in the world than nailing a talk.
Right.
I think my thing for me that always gets me, especially I did a talk fairly recently, and halfway through the presentation stopped working, and the clicker died, and I had to change clickers, and then that didn't work, and it was just like, but still carried on, make jokes out of it. But they're the kind of nightmare scenarios that for me it was like, oh my god, inside us dying, but I was making jokes out of it and trying to make it sort of a part of the presentation. Inside us absolutely dying. Have you had situations like that, or what's been your kind of one presentation where you were like, it didn't go, the content was great, but just didn't go to plan, or something terrible happened, or?
Well, I mean, I did knock over a podium once. I guess somebody wrote me with an interview about, like women's issues and harassment and all that. And, certainly I don't want to make this about that because, that's a whole different thing. But, you can Google it. I mean, I've had my so-called experience, and in the months after it, I continued to fulfill my obligations while kind of I guess you could say having some sort of a nervous breakdown, and I certainly wasn't throwing. Though it was interesting because it would be like I wasn't throwing the best talks or the best training ever, and then like the next week I would get like 5 stars across the board. So it wasn't like I was completely unable to speak, but there were points in time where I just wasn't doing my best all the time.
And maybe I mean, are you okay to talk about that? Because I think that's actually quite I guess I did read up on that, and of course that kind of harassment thing was quite a big thing for you, wasn't it? So are you able to talk about that at all, or?
Sure, we can talk about it. When I'm feeling particularly glib, I always say that I was attacked before it was fashionable, which I realize is like an awful thing to say, but nowadays with like Me Too and Time's Up and codes of conduct, it's like I probably would have gotten a lot more, like probably the kind of media attention I don't really want, but media attention nonetheless. So I had a little incident a couple of years into when I was on the speaking circuit where I was actually attacked by another speaker, in a sexual way, and I actually still have the coffee cup that I smashed his head in with. The hotel never charged me for it. Oddly enough, I did not get a bill either for the trail of blood running all over the hotel or the coffee cup that I stole from them. And I kind of wanted it I was kind of hoping it would just be this like silent thing between two people. Like, he thought, he misunderstood, I misunderstood, everybody misunderstood. But of course, dude like runs down to hotel lobby and calls the cops on me saying that I beat him up. So, naturally it becomes like this big thing. But, I came away from it feeling actually, once I was out of Poland and had my passport back and, all of that, I came away from it feeling actually very strong because, it's kind of like, I guess if your plane is crashing and you're a pilot, you don't really know like whether you can save it until you're in that situation. I've been in a situation where someone was, let's be frank about it, trying to rape me, and I had decked him in the head and gotten away. And so I came away from it actually feeling very strong, but it was actually, everything that came after, all the stuff, people, ripping apart my story, saying I was lying. That was actually, the hard part. And I mean, it's like, basic psychology 101 that, though I didn't want to deal with it either, the basic psychology 101 that when you go through something like that, it does affect you, psychologically a little bit. And, I flew straight from Poland to, another conference and probably another one after that. And, somewhere along the line, I just kind of, started to crack around the edges a little bit. And, that's what bothered me the most about it. I think that, it wasn't, the guy himself. It wasn't, how Polish police deals with stuff like that. It wasn't, people picking apart my story online. It was actually, the people that were very quick to, jump on social media in support of me and be like, we support Georgia, blah, blah, blah. But then, when the cracks started to show, when I wasn't doing, say, the best training or the best talk, they'd call me a train wreck or something like that. And I mean, if the best we can do, if the standard that we set for ourselves is writing the logical equivalent of rape is bad on Twitter, and that makes you a good ally, and after that you can be as jerky as possible, like, we have some work to do. So that's that.
So I think I have two responses to that. One is I'm sorry that you had to go through that, but I'm glad the guy got hit on the head with a cup. Absolutely well deserved, and I hope it hurt as fuck. Pardon my French. We're allowed to swear in this, by the way. And if we weren't, we are now. And that's a dreadful situation. But for me, the worst thing is that if you've been through that situation, the aftermath you discussed is quite dreadful, and I think that's a mark on society, right? And it's a mark on the community and an ability to kind of understand the situation and respond to it in a way that's supportive, right? I think people do like to start jumping on it and providing their own opinions. I mean, how did you deal with this? I mean, how did you kind of wade through? Quite clearly was quite a tough situation to be in, but the aftermath of that, how did you try and keep your composure? I know you mentioned you had talks that you didn't think that went quite well, but how did you actually manage to still keep going, I guess, is the question.
Well, the thing about it was that, I mean, the natural argument that, the perpetrator as well as, his supporters made was that I was crazy and was making the whole thing up. So, it kind of made me think that, if I did, go to see, like, a counselor about it, that would then, prove that he was right, that I was crazy and had indeed made the whole thing up, which is, I mean, the more you read or follow, people who have been through certainly much worse situations than me, because, I was very lucky in that, I mean, he ripped my favorite shirt, and he stole one of my shoes, but all in all, I came away from it all right. But I mean, really, if we're going to be honest, how I dealt with it was I kind of left the community and joined the kind of startup entrepreneurship community for a while. Naturally, I've come back and, done some more talks and things and trainings and whatnot since then. But, I went and started a second company in, a world that was, I mean, I was doing cybersecurity entrepreneurship, but, a lot less people knew who I was, which was kind of cool for a while.
Yeah, and so stepping outside the community, did that give you a different perspective then? Did it make you fall back in love with the community once you realised when you came back in, or did you still have those kind of feelings towards the community?
I mean, I guess it's half and half. I mean, there's a lot of things about the community that, particularly like compared with the business world, that I appreciate a lot. I mean, I take, for instance, like one of my first venture capital pitches. It, he asked me, what was my goal behind doing this? And, I had, all these, just as a side note, my startup does, security testing for mobility and the Internet of Things. So, I had this like great, I want to, make it so that we can, secure these things that are being ignored. And I also, would like to lead this charge into, I'm tired of seeing all these business people make all the money off the technology that, it's people like me that are building. And, I had this whole great manifesto. And, at the end of it, it kind of just cut me off and was like, your answer to that question is you want to make money for your stakeholders. And, that kind of made me feel kind of sad. So, I mean, there's a passion to the community about, what we're doing, even if it's not, I mean, it's weird kind of standing on that line between the business world and, the more traditional InfoSec community, because, I mean, you see so many people with so many great ideas that, I mean, yes, a lot of the times, like me, they're a bit, ahead of the curve in terms of where the market is, in terms of what people are buying. And, people buy based on, what good salesmen tell them to buy or what people pay Gartner to tell them to buy. But, you see all these people who are really, really passionate about building these things that they do to make security better. And, I did miss that when I was outside of the community, because I didn't see nearly as much of that. It was and is and I mean, it's not universal. I mean, certainly there are, please, entrepreneurship people who are listening, don't like blast me, because I know, there are people who are indeed passionate about what they're doing, and it's not just about, a way to make money or flip a company or, in the worst case, they're actually making security worse and they know it, but it sells, so there.
So you're essentially we're trying to make a change in sort of how organisations deal with mobility or Internet of Things, and rather than just buying the shiniest tool to actually prove and secure those devices, essentially.
Right. So I actually have a platform of products. We've gotten some early traction with mobile phishing. Naturally, the Russian stuff with, Fancy Bear and GRU and all that has, made, phishing once again kind of come to the forefront. But people don't get phished just over email, though, we've certainly not solved that problem yet. But I mean, people get phished over, WhatsApp Messenger. They get phished over text message, or they get, I posted a link to this on my Facebook, and I'm like, I wonder how many people are going to wonder if I'm phishing them. So I mean, there's lots of different ways. I mean, we did a reference pilot with Admiral Blair, former director of national intelligence. Reference pilot, for those who don't know, means basically that I can talk about it. They get a discount and I get to talk about it. And they shared a restaurant. They're in downtown DC. They shared a restaurant. They shared a restaurant. They shared a building with a restaurant. Like, there was a restaurant on the first floor. So we made a QR code, made a, not very graphically awesome poster, download this, scan this QR code, download the application, and, you'll get, a discount next time you go to the restaurant. People scan the QR code, they install the application on Android or iPhone. I mean, I was reading this for like Fancy Bear, as not part of the, Democratic National Committee stuff, but they, the Ukrainian artillery used an Android application to do targeting, and, they made a malicious version of that and ended up like destroying 20% or so of the Ukrainian artillery. I mean, the attackers are doing these things.
Yeah.
And as a pen tester, as someone who works as as a principal, as well as working with a lot of other firms, we're just kind of ignoring it, and we're putting boxes on it. Like, we always come up, Gartner comes up with a new magic quadrant: mobile
I love them.
device management, enterprise mobility management, mobile threat defense. So
Yes.
we've also gotten a lot of traction with people who are either kind of doing bake-offs of, what do we want to buy to protect our mobility and IoT, or, we're unhappy with what we have, and, I have a product that, it will, for instance, simulate jailbreaking and rooting out on the Android and iPhone. So it will, do everything from, all the way to Cydia to, no Cydia. And, it'll do all the different steps and see basically at which point, if ever, does, the product that's supposed to be protecting you from malware light up. And in a lot of cases, it does not, in fact, light up at all, which is unfortunate if that's what you're, buying it to do, is to protect you from, threats, and it's not protecting you from threats at all. So, that's kind of what I do now, in addition to, I still do, the traditional pen testing and training, and theoretically I'm writing a second edition of my book, so my publisher, with how many chapters I've turned in lately, might disagree with me.
Oh wow! That there's so many questions I have, and so many questions the community has right now. So, I think the bit about the QR code and about I've done that sort of social engineering engagement before, and I absolutely love QR codes. And I've used restaurants and I've used all that lovely stuff before, and it really works, right? Especially if you've mapped out where your target is and the restaurants they eat in, the bars they eat in, and you profile their social media pages and all that kind of great stuff. It's absolutely fantastic. One of the questions that Shadow has is, what are your thoughts on mobile app security testing companies like Now Secure? And do you think they do a good job with the automated testing services?
I do, just in my penetration testing, I do some mobile app testing. Along with web application testing, I've never really found a product that has been as good as a manual tester. I do, as part of it, do use some automated products, just one, because the customers want to see it, and two, just to give it a baseline. But I, in my startup, more focused on the users, the devices themselves, the infrastructure around them. I mean, there's a lot of players in mobile app security. So I don't. While I do some work in that area, it's not really my what differentiates me, so to speak. So I mean, I would certainly not rag on any of those things, but I mean, it's just really difficult. I mean, it's a lot easier to say test for a missing patch on Windows, because than to take a custom application that the computer has never seen before and get a very accurate picture of what its vulnerabilities are. It's just it's just a much harder problem to solve.
I guess it's also like standard pen testing there, right? So manual pen testing always trumps automated, because you need to interpret and actually understand the environment you're trying to test, or the application you're trying to test, and having someone actually understand the context of what you're trying to attack is much more important. And tools, even the best tools at the moment, can't simulate that.
Right, absolutely. And that kind of comes back to that idea of, really understanding the business side of things, that, it really, what would be a very big deal or a very not big deal to one business would be, exactly the opposite to another. That, it's very difficult I mean, I think with preventative products in general, I think it's a lot of the problem is that they try and make this one size fits all kind of thing. Whereas, even in the same industry, a business of the same size, I mean, take two large banks, even still, when it's, theoretically, you're really looking at the same sort of problems. They may have very, very different risk profiles. They might have very different, mobile policies or patching policies or password policies. So yeah, I mean, it's always going to be really different. And I think, as long as we continue to, try and make one size fits all security, we're going to continue to have trouble.
Yeah, and as that really kind of brings me into something. I was at a talk yesterday with the son of Sun Tzu, if you've ever caught him on Twitter, good guy. And he was doing a talk about strategy, right? And it kind of ties back into testing and stuff. And he used some great analogies around this. And part of what we do as security professionals has kind of got me thinking more about threat modeling more than anything else. Was about using an analogy of we're trying to we're training ourselves, we're doing a lot of testing, we build our labs, we do a lot of practice work, a bit like golfers, and that makes sense. So we're trying to put the ball in the hole and try and get the perfect putt, when actually we should be really training a bit like American football players in terms of the playbooks and understanding the strategy around how we try and attack something. All defenders, actually, is another thing as well. It was talking about in terms of the blue team side of things. Everyone wants to join the red team because, as you rightly said at the beginning of the talk, it's really exciting, you're breaking stuff. But actually, what if the blue team could hit back as hard, right? Maybe it'd make attackers think again before actually, trying to break applications or break into company systems. So, if you think about that kind of mentality, I had a point that's kind of a bit late. I've lost it now. But the point I was trying to make was that I think, we're trying to, when we're trying to break things, we need to think about the wider picture, the context, the environment, the compensating controls, not just what we're trying to break, whether we can go upstream or downstream and how far we can actually go, I guess, is the point I'm trying to make.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's what's missed a lot. And so much of the education around, security testing, and it's really in the second edition of my book, it's something I'm really trying to hit home, not just, I'm not going to say my first book was bad. I think my first book was awesome. I still have a hard time believing I wrote it. And the amount of people who've written me that say, that it helped them get in the industry, continually, keeps me going. But, I definitely want to make the second book, 5,000 times better. And, I really do want to make it more of, not just, these are the techniques, but, more of a real world scenario, which, it being 4 years later, with all the online options we have now to, build labs. I think that's definitely going to be possible. But yeah, I think that, I work with a lot of junior people who are like, oh, yeah, I got domain admin, hooray, everything's good. And I was like that when I was starting out too. But that's the beginning of the story. Or yeah, so I think that we definitely really need to think of it in business context.
Yeah, and it brings back down to some things like when you're reporting some vulnerabilities, or you're reporting critical findings. What the company really cares about is okay, well, how does this affect my critical asset? So if you talk about sort of threat modeling to some degree, you're trying to threat model and attack the path that you're trying to take. Actually, what you need to look at is what are the critical assets. So yes, I've got domain admin over here, or I've got some kind of not domain admin, maybe admin privileges, but actually, how can I get to the assets they care about? And actually, how can I disrupt those assets, or degrade them, or destroy them, or exfiltrate the data, or whatever it may be? And I think when you start reporting on that, say, yes, actually, we found all these things, but actually on the stuff that you actually really care about, this is what we're able to do. Which actually means we're able to stop you trading, or able to whatever it may be that they care about. I think a lot of that's missed from some of the stuff that I've seen before, which I think is the context bit, right? Which I think is quite important when you're doing a test. I think if you can translate what is very technical into a business kind of context, then organizations start to take notice.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with you 100%, 110%.
I like that. There was a really good question, actually. There's two questions I wanted to ask. One was a bit more about the mobile stuff, and then I'm going to talk a bit about career paths, because one of the guys asked, I think it was Daniel, asked really good questions, actually. So Zustaf asked a question earlier when you were talking about mobile, was about what do you think of BYD, bring your own device products?
I think it's here to stay. I think, the time of, people having two devices, I mean, the kinds of places that, have the budget and are going to bother with all the, red tape with that, or the kinds of places that don't allow mobiles into the workplace anyway. I think that, it, I guess I tie it in with, so many other things. It's just, I actually wrote something about this. I think that the next generation ways that we use technology, I mean, they obviously pose a clear and present danger, be it mobility, be it cloud-based outsourcing of our email to Google Apps, or our lead generation to Salesforce.com. We're increasingly coupling our business and personal lives to these mobile devices that don't truly call us master. These technologies are entering our homes and office, everything from smart TVs that are listening to our every conversation, smart assistants that take it a step further and unwittingly act upon our conversations. Google that if you wanted to read something funny. Light bulbs with IP addresses and hard-coded root passwords, and our increasing reliance on industrial controls that, they're so fragile you can't even really security test them in a traditional way, and yet they continue to prove susceptible to malware that's a little more sophisticated than what plagues unpatched Windows desktops. So, I think BYOD, bring your own device, having mobility, Internet of Things devices, industrial controls, outsourced, cloud-based stuff. I mean, I think it's all part of, the same problem of, we have built security for so long on this idea of, we control the perimeter. We can see everything going in and out. That's where we put our next gen firewall, our intrusion detection, our intrusion prevention, our, data loss prevention, our Gartner Magic Quadrants for everything. But all these devices are speaking, mobile modem, Bluetooth, near field communication, Zigbee. They're speaking all these different languages that are not passing the perimeter. So, it's just, this is how things are going to be. The CEO wants to bring his iPhone to work. That's where it all started. One Christmas, one CEO at one company got an iPhone and said, we're putting this on the network. And there was nothing the security guys could do about it. And it's all just gone downhill from there. And it's something that we have a lot of work to do about. It's not going away.
And even some of the security around bring your own devices is limited, right? So if you think about some of the container apps, like your sort of what used to be good, which is now, is it BlackBerry sort of enterprise suite, whatever it is.
UEM.
That's it. And all those, they all have their benefits, but they're not really the right solution, right? I think you can prevent jailbreaking to some degree, but of course there's ways of bypassing that anyway. And I think there's always going to be an inherent risk, right, when you allow users to kind of bring their own devices in, I guess.
Right, like I said, that's a lot of what my company does is work with companies with our products to show them where they're lacking with I think what happened is people stopped using BlackBerry, and there was a line item for the BlackBerry Enterprise Server, or the BES. Line items are great when people have budget. It's easy to make sales, so people started building these things. mobile device management, they called it that. Then they called it enterprise mobility management. Now, mobile application management, mobile threat defense, pick your poison about name. And I mean, in many cases, they're actually bought by operations and not by security. And, that the ultimate goal is provisioning and, understanding what your assets are, and security is at best an afterthought. And, I mean, like you said, yeah, there's some limited. I mean, in the worst case, we're seeing, these things that say they prevent jailbreaking look specifically for the Cydia app. Which, if I jailbreak my iPhone so I can do, mobile application testing, which, from time to time I do, I'll get the Cydia app. But if I am an attacker who's after, the secrets in your keychain, I don't need a third-party app store. I just need to run unsigned code. So I just run an exploit. There is no Cydia. The box does not see me.
Correct. They're looking for the wrong solution, right? And I think I think that's the problem, right? Because these were only designed to prevent the devices being jailbroken, so they don't break corporate policy. They were never really designed to prevent slightly more advanced adversaries who would want to compromise the device, right?
Right. And I mean, I think people like to put their head in the sand about it. They're like, oh, I'll do something about it when, PCI or HIPAA or NIST says I have to. But, the attackers are here and now. I mean, be hitting you and me yet. But, as I mentioned before, I mean, they destroyed a bunch of Ukrainian artillery with a malicious Android app. I mean, these things are happening. This is the future, and if we don't, get on top of this, I think we're in for a lot of hurt as an industry.
Yeah, and of course that takes us back to things that people. I do lots of, a bit like yourself. I do a lot of training with end users, and you think the amount of end users that don't even have anti-malware on them, and anti-malware on a mobile device doesn't really do that much, but it gives you some baseline of protection against some of the basic stuff that's out there, right? And lots of end users don't even have anti-malware on their phones, and you kind of go, well, that you wouldn't really have your Windows machine without anti-malware, but you've got an Android device which is, is susceptible to a whole range of things, not just malware, but malicious apps, and just literally you just have nothing, and you think that's okay. All right.
The thing that I've come to find out, I guess, I mentioned at the very beginning of this that my mother has a PhD in computer science. My dad's a physicist. I am honestly the dumbest one in my family, and these are really, really smart people, and I'm surrounded by incredibly intelligent people in the entrepreneurship and business world that aren't necessarily in cybersecurity, like really smart people. And a lot of times they just don't get it. They won't put the printer on the network because it might get hacked, and then they're using Windows P, and you look at their Internet Explorer, and it's got like 9 million toolbars, and they just don't get it. And that's a failure on our part, because we're the ones who have to teach them, because these are not people who are too stupid to understand this. These are people who understand like thermodynamics. So we have a lot of work to do.
Indeed, as an industry, we have a lot of work to do across the board. In fact, that brings me back to something I was doing today. So the reason my voice sounds a little bit croaky is I've been presenting for about 8.5 hours, which is a long time to present, by the way, and not back to back, with maybe a half an hour, 45-minute break in between the sort of 2 4-hour slots. And one of the things I was talking about, slightly on topic, slightly off topic, was training developers around building, developers that are really kind of embracing safe or agile, and trying to sort of get them to understand the risk management around what they're doing. So try to build risk management into the process. But as part of that is cybersecurity. And these guys are super smart, working for some pretty awesome companies doing some crazy stuff. Right? I can't talk about for obvious reasons. But when you start talking about the basics of risk management and say, well, look, let's talk about some of the basics in your life and sort of say, look, are you doing these kind of things, and do you understand the impact of them, and do you understand all this? And you've got developers who have access to, private GitHub repos, public GitHub repos, code base is worth a phenomenal amount of money, right? And you're sitting there going, you don't have two-factor authentication on any of your accounts. You reuse passwords. You don't do this. You try and again and say, right, now that's your threat model, right? And you've just gone to have I been pawned and realised you're in 12 breaches, of which some are quite recent, and there's some private ones that I can show you're not on. Suddenly their threat model's completely changed. They say, right, now take that. That's just you. Times that by your development team of 500, 600 people. Then times that by the assets you have as a business. Now times that by all the interdependencies of people outside your business, the infrastructure team, the general end users. And then suddenly you tend to realize why cybersecurity is a big problem, just with those small things there. And when you start doing that, so how do you manage the risk, and how do you actually sort of model that? And actually, when you start taking the context of what personally is quite bad and try and expedite that across a large company, that's why people are kind of failing at cybersecurity.
Oh, absolutely. I wish I could take what you just said and put it verbatim in my next edition of my book, because you said it so well.
You can quote me on that if you like.
All right.
But you know what? That's the problem, and I think this is the this is the thing that I think that as professionals, as that we, especially when we're consulting with customers, I think we're not missing a trick, but it's kind of, if you try and explain something like that to an organization, then they start to understand why their CISOs or why their security professionals or why their internal red teams are kind of waving the flag going, look, we need to do more. We need more people. If you look at, so I was dealing with a company that have 85,000 employees, right? It's not a huge company, right, by American standards, but for a UK company, it's quite big, right? And they've got four people in their red team. They've got maybe, a smaller number of people in their kind of blue team, and so they've got maybe 20 security professionals trying to support 85,000 people.
Yeah.
The numbers don't quite stack up, right? And we're kind of wondering why that when we come and do a pen test and we completely rip their infrastructure to bits, or we break their apps, they're like, well, oh yeah, because there's only 4 of us. Okay, great. So I think the numbers don't quite stack up, right? When you're dealing with adversaries that might have hundreds of people, or trying to target you at the same time, or you have a business, a large business, and an adversary that has 10, 12 people, maybe more, 20 people trying to target you at the same time. Suddenly you're in a very difficult situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's definitely, going back to the beginning of my career, the problem that we had, that, there were, 4 of us and a gazillion of them, and, they all wanted their iTunes updated, and they all had to click on everything they could possibly find. And, yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's, at least, we're getting more press, we're getting more attention. At least my royalty statements say so, at least. So, I think that, hopefully, companies are going to start taking security a lot more seriously, and, putting the budget in place to, help with some of that.
Yeah, and this brings me back to a question that Jack's just asked, and this is something which was asked to actually 2 people recently. And I guess Jack's got this bee in his bonnet about this question, so I'll ask it anyway. Right? And basically, he's asked. So he says in verbatim, Georgia, we asked Dave Kennedy this question: is pen testing dead? Curious of your thoughts. And I think the context to that, before you answer it, is more about because everyone's moving towards red teaming and automation to some degree, right? And I won't go into that particular element of it, but I think that's probably the context behind that. That there's been some talks around, well, red teaming is taking over pen testing, when actually theoretically they're very different disciplines. But what's your thoughts on it?
I absolutely do not think that pen testing is dead.
Good.
I think that, like you say, red teaming and pen testing, though they do have certainly a lot of overlap. I mean, we have a hard enough time getting our users, in the pen test. I mean, to let us, do anything with their phones, or, go full scope or actually, let us test everything. So, I mean, the number of clients that'll actually go for a full on red team at this point is just, in my experience, abysmally low. And, in terms of the automation, I mean, I write automation tools that automate this stuff. But I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, as we talked about previously, I mean, it's always going to take a human to one, explain it, in an understandable way to the customer, and two, to, make that leap from, these are the results in raw form. What does that mean to this particular entity? So I think, if anything, pen testing is becoming, a bigger thing than it has been in the past.
I couldn't agree more with you, by the way. Having working for a company that does pen testing and have been in this industry for a very long time, that is most certainly what we should be looking at. I think red team is important, right? I think if you look at what different people say about this, yes, you have to do red teaming, but the one thing I keep saying about this is that if we're not getting if companies aren't getting the basics right, they're not doing the core basic things to secure their networks, their applications. SQL injection, for example, it's been around for like 20 odd years plus, maybe, and yet it's still responsible for a lot of data breaches, right? So
right.
if we can't get that right, then how are we supposed to get red teaming with custom malware and custom exploits? Companies, there are companies that are ready for red teaming because they have those processes, they have a SIEM, they have a SOC, they have a proper well-established blue team with intelligence, and they have guys that understand security architecture. They've got DevSecOps, they've got a whole range of things in place. They do regular pen testing. They've got their patching levels are pretty nailed, right? So they've got those basics right, and they've probably got an instant response team as well. And they've probably got a cert, whatever it may be, right? So that's when you're really ready for a red team. If you haven't got that, then don't start talking about red teaming. Talk about pen testing and get that right.
Right. Actually, Martin Boss, who actually works for Dave Kennedy at Trusted Sec, does a really good talk. Or I don't know if he still does it, but I've seen him give a talk that it was even "Are you ready for a pen test?" and really does go into the difference between a vulnerability assessment, a pen test, a red teaming, and where you need to be in order to be ready for those things. And that's a really good point that a lot of the customers that we're working with, they're not ready for a red team. They may not even be ready for a pen test. If you're still missing your eternal blues and things like that. I mean, you'd probably be better off spending your money on some sort of vulnerability scanner of some sort, and running that periodically to get yourself over that hump before you bring in a pen tester even.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And actually, there's a lot of companies that just still running like mainframes and stuff like that. So you're like, well, yeah, you maybe just migrate some of your legacy, just move it to the cloud, or maybe to Azure, or just do something with it. Because again, that's always good fun, right? Of course, no one will touch the mainframes because they're so legacy, and they're probably still being written in COBOL, so the applications on there. So you're then got you've got that kind of that problem as well. So right, let's talk about your book, right? Because and this ties into a question that Daniel asked earlier. So because it's obviously a key thing. So Daniel asked, his question's disappeared. Why has it disappeared? Oh, there it is. There are a lot of different paths you can go to become an InfoSec professional. Which one would you recommend for beginners?
So for beginners, I would say that I don't really have a good answer to it. I think that the most important thing is to pick something that you're passionate about, and that's kind of what I tried to do with my book, is kind of give you a buffet of a lot of different stuff. Yes, it says penetration testing, a hands-on introduction to hacking on the title, But there's a lot of different stuff that's covered, and absolutely still buy the first edition if you haven't. I've mentioned the second edition a couple times, but believe me, with everything I've got going on, plus it's going to be a lot different. So absolutely, if you like the first one, you should buy the second one because it's going to be a lot different. But there's malware analysis in there. There's mobile stuff in there. There's a lot of different things in there that I the goal being, and then the last chapter was a project that I had written that has since become a product, with my DARPA project. So I think that the most important thing is as you're starting out to find something that makes you want to get up in the morning, so to speak, and work on it. And my second piece of advice would be to if it doesn't necessarily have to be like me, where the first talk I gave was at ShmooCon, which is in hindsight was a very like hubristic thing to do. But if you've got like a local meetup or a local DEF CON group, or local B-sides, or anything like that, give a training or a talk about, it doesn't have to be like a 0 day. I mean, there's going to be a ton of people who can learn from you. And in my experience, the best way to become proficient at anything is to teach it to other people. So that would be my advice for beginners. It's not necessarily what, but how to approach it.
Wow, that's a lot to take in. That's a lot of good advice there. And I guess bringing me on to my next point. How did you come about writing the book? So what was the original idea behind the book? What was maybe the idea, the driver actually behind writing a book?
Well, I guess when you're in grade school, they ask you, what you want to be when you grow up. And I always said I wanted to be a novelist, but then I became an InfoSec professional. Actually, it was the publisher that approached me and asked me if I wanted to write a book. I guess the assumption was always that I was going to write a mobile book. But I wanted to write the book that I'd wished I'd had starting out. I didn't know a lot of people in the industry. I was kind of shy, afraid to ask questions. I was doing like the offensive security certified professional stuff, and it was, if you ask a question, the bot would literally come up and say, try harder, which, I think I could have gotten a lot more out of the course if that had not been the case. So, I kind of tried to write the book that I had wished I'd had when I was coming up, to answer some of those questions, go in depth to, the whys and the wherefores, not just the, and then you hit exploit and it runs kind of thing. So, I mean, I think some people who will remain nameless thought it was a really dumb idea and bordered on plagiarism. But like I said previously, the amount of people that write me and or come up to me and say that my book helped them pass the OSCP or the CEH or whatever, or help them get their first job or this, that, or the other, and like really change these people's lives. I mean, that's kind of hard to wrap your head around, I guess, that just this, all this because of the words I put on a page.
But I think that's the important thing, right? Books do, especially books that people are passionate about or topics people are passionate about. They do change people's lives. They do. If you're passionate about what you've written and you're proud of it, and then that comes through in the writing, and it comes through in the advice you've imparted onto other people, your experience. Well, then and that actually is as you you rightly say, it's simple to follow, and it's clear and concise, and well, that is going to change people's lives, and of course that's going to have an impact on them getting to infosec, right, or becoming passing their OSCP. So all right, hats off to you, I guess. Really, is guess what I'm trying to say.
Thank
It's a great
you.
achievement. Or should I say, many hats off? There you go. I should have done that first time. That would have been much better. Or maybe not. Terrible joke, but
you can edit it later.
yeah, we can edit some laughter in there as well. We can just put some, we can do all that kind of great stuff. So, but anyway, or a drum kit. Anyway, but I guess so your second book, because I'd like to a second edition. So what was the driver behind that? Because is it because you wanted to say so much more now you had the experience of the first book, or was there something else that you wanted to do as part of it?
Well, the publisher really wanted me to do it, and I was originally reluctant because I don't really like to repeat myself, and I kind of, have other ideas for books I'd like to write. But I was convinced by, my advisory team that I should do it, and, I have enough ideas of, how to follow along in the same vein of edition one, but with enough things different, enough things added. The goal is actually to have, an online lab option as well, instead of just being able to, set up your virtual machines, and then, it can kind of grow organically. These are the kinds of things you can do in 2018 that were a little bit harder to do back when I was doing the first edition. I guess I can learn from the experiences of, things that aged well versus things that didn't, be able to make it, a much better book, that, and yet different enough that, hopefully, and many people have said that they will, people who enjoyed the first one would, buy the second one as well. And, royalty checks are always nice. But yeah, I mean, it's hard, I guess. They always say that, like, if you're like a singer, your second album is the hardest. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I mean, there's a certain amount of self-doubt involved that it's like, what if it's not as good as the first one? But, I'm working on it. But definitely, go out and pick up the first edition. It's certainly not coming out tomorrow. It's not coming out at Black Hat and DEF CON, I assure you, because I have not finished writing it. And then, got to get all the online lab tie-in stuff set up. But yeah, it should be a real trip if it works out.
Yeah, do you know what? I'm sure it will. And I think I think the key thing is that, and a lot of people here, by the way, and I just want to read out some of the comments because people have written out some stuff. So Yu's written, I've absolutely loved Georgia's book. I recommend it to so many people. Jack's put, yes, your book and courses help many kids. Have shared it to noobs, and Georgia have shared, again, I have it in my backpack for a month or so. It's crazy, right? And so clearly you've had an impact on so many people, and I think that's a great thing to do. I think I think when people write books that have an impact, that then definitely write a second book, right, which you're doing, and I think you'll have a different impact, because if you're including new content, you might affect a completely new audience, or you've got new life experiences as well, and new technical experiences, and the technology's moved on, and of course the attacks have moved on. So I definitely think you will be more than successful. And of course, people having read the first book will, I'm sure, pick it up and learn something else. So I think that's I'm certainly, everyone here is definitely behind you anyway. So
Well, I appreciate that. I'm gonna write 4 chapters tonight just for you.
So yeah, do you know what? I think I think I've got some questions for you as well, personally, and then I'm going to go to the audience here, right? So here's the thing. So you obviously do a lot of talks. You've obviously written a book. You've got what seems like a very successful company, or I've had a company in the past. So what's what's the future hold for you? What are you kind of, if you've got a plan, if you've got a goal that you're kind of looking to achieve this year or next year, or do you have like a vision that you want to be somewhere in a certain period of time?
Okay, well, I try not to have too many goals, because then, if I don't reach them, then, I kind of get depressed. But I think my two main goals, right now are, getting the second edition of the book out and, the accompanying, online labs. And, someone mentioned like, the online course that ties in with the book. So getting that out, as well as with the product company, getting a lot more clients with that, and certainly looking towards a potential acquisition or additional venture capital raise with that company. So I think those are my two main goals right now.
Nice. So company acquisition is always quite a good thing. That's a great position to be in. And are you obviously I can't really ask any of those questions, so I won't even ask them. But that sounds very, very exciting. And I guess from a talks perspective, are you any talks planned at Black Hat or DEF CON or B-Sides sort of during the sort of summer hacker camp type period?
I'm actually not be going out there, actually just for business related stuff at the same time. So I might come to some of the parties and might do a book signing. But I'm not doing any talks at summer camp this year. I did do DEF CON China, the first DEF CON in China, and also my first time in China. So I guess I let that be my hacker summer camp. I mean, at some point, that I guess from the time I started in InfoSec, I think I was still in grad school when I first went. It was kind of a ritual, and then for a while I was doing the Black Hat training and the giving the talks, but right now I'm kind of focused on some other things.
So there's a small chance that we might actually see you at DEF CON this year then, so walking around or at B-Sides, basically.
It's possible. I'm actually after this going to have another meeting where I hopefully will find out whether I'm going or not.
Oh, fingers crossed. Well, if you do decide to go, we'll be having some kind of many hats meetup, so you're more than welcome to come and join us. I don't know where it's going to be. I have literally no idea, but we'll definitely be having some, and I can give you a T-shirt for coming to be a speaker on here. So that's great. So
that would be worth coming just for that. So I'll see what I can do.
Excellent. Well, there you go. There's an offer right there. Okay, so I'll make sure I put together a notification and let you know about that. So because I'm taking out like a ton of T-shirts and stickers. In fact, I'm probably going to throw out all my clothes and just literally just bring loads of Many Hack Club T-shirts to give out. Probably, who knows? All right, so let's do some questions from the people here as well, because I've asked a lot of my questions, and I'm sure people would like me to ask theirs as well. So, so Jack's asked, do you still work or still engage and support the EFF and cause and any EFF and any causes you support? That we okay, does that make sense?
I definitely, I've always been a big fan of the EFF. They got me out of some interesting contracts I was dumb enough to sign early in my career. I don't know if they still do it, but it used to be they would kind of have like the free, legal advice at DEF CON and ShmooCon and things like that. So, I'm definitely a big supporter of that. I try and be supportive just in general of, things that are, groups that are supporting, minorities and new people in the industry, because, as something of a wallflower myself, I understand how difficult it can be. So, I mean, there's a lot of good causes in our industry, and when they're brought to my attention, I, at the very least retweet them. But I try and do more. Try and go give talks to like Girl Scouts, who are like 7 years old and just learning about Python. Like, I did that. I think last month I did this thing called Roadtrip Nation, where it's sponsored by PBS, and these college students actually get on a bus and drive across the country, and they make a documentary about it. And they're people who are interested in getting into cybersecurity, and they meet with industry professionals as they travel the country. And that was a lot of fun, and I got to drive the bus. So check out Road Trip Nation, the life hackers, if you want to see me like almost run a bus into a building. But I think I'm rambling, but yes, there's a lot of good causes in the industry.
We have some good causes over here actually. There's something called the White Hat Rally, which is a really good cause that I'm a big fan of. Which basically you buy like a banger for less than like £800, and you tag it up with whatever you want to, and then you basically create a team, and then you drive across Europe. You do a rally drive across Europe, from the UK across to Europe, and usually to like Italy or something like that. And then all the money raised for this charity goes towards this non-profit goes towards sort of charities that the InfoSec community votes on. So that's a pretty decent cause as well, because that goes to sort of helping people get into InfoSec or certain sort of other causes as well.
I'm coming with you. When is this happening? I
Yeah,
want to
it's
do
great.
this.
Yeah. I think it's happened or happening. I think it happens in August, but definitely we should. Do you know what I think we should do? In fact, just give me a brilliant idea. We should do a Many Hats Club White Hat Rally. We should submit. That would be awesome. Get like a team of Many Hats Club people just driving across Europe and just causing absolute chaos,
Yeah,
and then doing like
I would
barbecues and
love
stuff
to
like that.
drive across Europe, cities where the conferences are. But yeah, I would love to drive across Europe for a good cause. Count me
Definitely. Right,
in.
I'm gonna put that on there because that would be proper badass to do that. Okay, that's it. There we go. Yeah, exactly. Imagine that. Um, okay, and I have literally a ton of questions, so I'm just gonna just fire them at you whilst you still have signal. So, this is a good question. Jack's come in with another question. Is Georgia, may we ask if you had any mentors and whom you said inspire you to follow your dreams, or anyone currently in InfoSec today?
Well, my first mentor, I would say, was Rob Fuller, or he goes by the handle Moodix, and he was, I mentioned in the collegiate cyber defense competition, he was one of the red team members when I went, and he actually, took the time to come to our school and give a talk for us, and I have a picture that I posted online not long ago of like us with him. And I think if I had to like pin down the moment where it all kind of came together that this was going to be my life, it was that he drove down from, I guess he was in the DC area at the time, so we're talking a couple of hours, took a day off work to come talk to some college students about being a hacker. And that was just amazing. And so I mean, in the interest of time, I think stop with that. I mean, I certainly have, a lot of people I look up to, but, that was, really the beginning, as it were.
That sounds awesome. And I understand you haven't got much time, so I want to make sure I fire a couple more questions before wrapping up. This is a good question, actually. So it's You're Wrong. Asks, are you running into situations where the security deployed at businesses is so poor that you're referring potential customers to other services before using your services?
I'm not, because I kind of run the full gauntlet. If people think they want a red team and, as we, mentioned before, they're just not ready, I am perfectly capable of, hitting the button on the vulnerability scanner if, that's what they're at. I can definitely adjust as necessary. I do run into that a fair amount. I try and weed it out in the pre-engagement interviews, but you never know. But I have a, I guess, wide enough skill set that I'm usually able to handle it.
That's a very good question, and I think some organisations that do cross spectrum of consultancy services would probably take that. And just to answer that question, I think as well is you want to take a customer on a maturity sort of journey, so assess their maturity and their ability to obviously patch and understand their threat model and understand what they're trying to protect, their assets, all that kind of stuff. And once you have that baseline, you can then work out the services that kind of help them improve that maturity, whether it's in the policies, whether it's testing, whether it's education and training, or whatever it may be. So I think as long as you deploy those things and you build a plan to kind of say, well, actually, if you baseline all this and you prove all these areas and you kind of get those things configured correctly, you've reached a solid baseline, and it's then building upon those foundations and understanding, I talk about appropriate security, because no one wants to be if you're a massive bank, you're going to invest a huge amount of technology and automation and machine learning potentially, or whatever it may be. Whereas if you're a smaller, medium-sized business, or you're not dealing anything that's quite as critical, then actually your appropriate level of security be against the adversary, the threats, and of course the risk acceptance levels of the business. So I guess you kind of have to map that to what an organisation has. So I guess just what we'll do is I think I'll thank you for joining us, and I like to end talks on some kind of weird notes anyway. So Georgia, it has been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. We're privileged to have you here. You have inspired many people. You have given talks which have really kind of given people lots to think about the career. You've produced great research papers, and of course you have dealt with some pretty serious situations but come out on top. And you know what? There are very few people in the industry that kind of a lot of people in the community have that genuine level of admiration for and respect. And I think you have that from everyone here tonight and everyone listening to this podcast, including myself, of course. So I'd just like to thank you for contributing and doing everything you do for the community, and of course helping, with writing awesome books and all the stuff that you do. So I just want to thank you for that, and thank you for being part of the talk tonight.
Thank you. The pleasure is all mine. Thank you so much for having me on, and definitely do send me the rest of those questions, and I will, answer them the old-fashioned way.
Yeah, we'll definitely do that. But that you do get the inaugural Many Hats Club Legends role, which means you're one of the few people that have spoken on here, and so you get that role. And of course, the DEF CON T-shirt, Many Hats Club T-shirt, will be on its way to you when we see you at DEF CON or at the next conference. Are you heading to Derby at all? DerbyCon this year?
I actually have a conflict for that one. I guess I don't get to go to very many of the big ones anymore. I am hopefully going to be back at that one soon, though. Maybe next year.
Definitely. Well, we'll definitely hopefully see you somewhere this year. But yeah, please do share where you're going, and of course we'll follow you on Twitter. So, but certainly we'll be very keen to meet up at some point at one of the conferences and give you a T-shirt if you don't decide to come to Vegas. So
hopefully we'll find out tonight.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Yes, of course, fingers definitely crossed. So look, thank you very much for joining us. For everyone been listening to us on tonight's episode. You've been joined by CyberSec Stu speaking to Georgia Weidman about hacking, her book, about sort of getting into InfoSec, and of course mobile security as well. A whole range of things, actually. It's been a really interesting talk. Next week we are joined by Troy Hunt. So he'll be joining us in a nice early time of the morning for me at 7 a.m., which will be sort of 6 a.m. UTC. And of course, in America, that will be very, very early in the morning. But of course, the cards are flipped. I'm no longer staying up till 2 a.m. UK time. So please come join us for that. For Troy Hunt next week. And of course, if you've missed any of our talks, you can catch them on the manyhats.club or on your podcast app. And you've been joined by Cybersec Stu, your host. That's me. And of course, I will see you all very, very soon. Thank you.